Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. This month is dedicated to films that are the wholesomest of the wholesome. In tonight's episode, we'll be having marmalade sandwiches with our friend Paddington 2. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. Welcome back. Just a quick reminder, when you're kind and polite, the world is right. Isn't that right, Whiskey?
Bears told me that once.
So I have had a very rough week. I was one of the many Swifties trying to get tickets, and now, want, Ticketmaster to be dissolved into, I don't know, battery acid or something.
It's been wild, man. I'm not a Swiftie myself, but the news has been crazy, and I'm just glad, Pearl Jam tried to warn us in the 90s, but we didn't listen. We didn't listen.
Right? Didn't they? Wait, were they the ones that one time said that our gravestone should read Pearl Jam, we should have listened or something? Or was that somebody else that said that?
I don't think that was them, but yeah, I think they were pretty, I think what they did to try and combat it before they were buried by Ticketmaster was I think they tried to only do shows at venues that weren't, acquired by Live Nation or something.
Yeah.
I mean, this was it was the 90s, so I don't even, the merger hadn't happened or anything, but I believe what they were doing was if a venue was in bed with Ticketmaster, they wouldn't do a show there. And it just ended up they lost money over it, and Ticketmaster was able to basically bury them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor Pearl Jam.
They're fine. They're back together doing, I don't know if they released a new album, but I know the band's back together, so that's good.
Don't laugh. The first Pearl Jam song I ever heard was featured on an episode of Castle. So
it's all good. Frankly, out of all the grunge bands, they're probably my least favorite. I'm sure I'm making some enemies saying that on the show, but they're not bad. They're just not my thing. I'm more of a Nirvana or a Soundgarden guy myself. And technically, I don't consider them grunge, but one of my favorite bands of all time is the Smashing Pumpkins. And even though they aren't really grunge, they were roped into the whole grunge scene in the 90s. They were considered a grunge band, even though I really wouldn't consider them one. So
Right. Well, now that we've gotten our bad week out of the way, it's time to hop back into Wholesome Month. As we talked about in our last episode, we had the very relaxing Paddington, which I absolutely loved.
Yes, and as I said in the episode, I gave it a 2.5, but not because I dislike it, more just my review scores, it's based on what I assume the average moviegoer would think, so as I said in the episode, if it were my personal score, it would be a 3 or a 3.5, but just because I know some people would find it boring,
yeah,
it's 2.5. It might not be for you, but I highly recommend you check it out.
See, you're a conscientious scorer, and this is what I feel, and I think I gave it a 4.5 or something, because so relaxed.
I separate my personal taste from, if I'm putting my movie critic hat on, I'm, thinking of just the general public. So I'll say, for instance, the Indiana Jones trilogy, my personal favorite is Temple of Doom. Now, if I'm judging it based on its qualities as a film, it's not the best one. It's just the one I like the most.
Right.
I would probably say Raiders is the best one, just based on everything else. But yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm at, especially with Paddington. It's one of my favorite Jim Jarmusch films, but I know some people are going to be like, it's boring. When's the car chase going to happen? What's with all the poetry? So I know it's not going to be for everybody, but still, if you haven't listened to that episode, highly recommend you check it out. I said it in the episode, but it's impossible to spoil that movie. So
yes,
feel free to listen. If it sounds like you might want to check it out, go ahead. It's a good movie. And if you have Amazon Prime, it's free to watch. So,
and you're probably right. If it hadn't spoken to the inner writer in me as much as it did, I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have been more like,
Well, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about it. I had a feeling you would like it, but again, like I said in that episode, it's I know you don't like typically movies that are about quote unquote nothing.
Yeah.
So it's curious to see what you'd think, but I had a feeling you would like it.
So,
but
on to
what
today's
are we talking
movie
about?
then. We are talking about Paddington 2 from 2017. As you all probably have known on the internet, it is hailed as the greatest film ever made.
We're reviewing the meme, guys. We're reviewing the 2018 meme.
Yes, and
the greatest film ever made.
Right? You guys probably all remember the memes of I think it's a Paddington squatting down like gang style with throwing a peace sign next to the Citizen King.
Grave. That's a comedian. That's a comedian I like. It's John Mulaney.
Yeah.
Like I don't know whose grave he's squatting down, but that's like it's John Mulaney doing that, and then they turned that into anything. Anytime something dies and everyone's happy about it, they just put something over John Mulaney's face. Like
they're like,
and it actually kind of reminds me. This year, Morbius was sort of being joked about as like the greatest superhero film. Ironically, because it was so bad, everyone was saying, "Oh my god, it's so good."
It's so bad that it's good.
That's my favorite movie moment of 2022, and I doubt anything's gonna overshoot it. I just love how people gaslit Sony into thinking that people liked the movie and re-releasing it, and then no one went to see it because everyone was joking.
They were joking about how bad it was.
It's like, studio executives cannot detect irony apparently, but it reminds me of that, but more so like not because this is a bad movie, but because it's a good movie that hilariously is probably one of the, if not the most highest rated on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into later. I kind of want to talk about like the hysteria with Rotten Tomatoes over the many years it's been around. But yeah, like this film is interesting to talk about because of that. And I definitely have some takes. Nothing too hot this episode, but I definitely have some things to say about it. But before we get into that, what are you drinking, Whiskey?
So I talked about how last episode how I was gonna do something else, so I pushed it off for this episode. So I am drinking, it's very tame but perfectly fits this episode. I am having Earl Grey tea, hot Earl Grey tea, and I sweetened it with, instead of honey like I normally do, with orange marmalade. So very
dare
fitting.
you. I'm the one drinking booze alone yet again. But I'm sure we'll make up for it
in the future, future.
mini preview for the next episode, but there will be a drinking game involved, so T won't be able to weasel his way out of that. Unless you're lying and just drinking water or whatever. But anyway.
Yes, this absolutely is vodka. You can't tell.
Oh, yes.
Not even on video stream.
Right? No, but So with me, I wanted to do a cocktail. I even thought of like marmalade cocktails. I did a bit of research looking into like cocktails that were made in London. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm being a lazy bones is because I still have like grenadine from our cocktails over the summer. And I know like if I made one of the London cocktails, I'd buy all this stuff that I would use just for the cocktail, and then it would just be sitting in my pantry forever.
Commit.
So anyway, any listeners tuning in from the UK are gonna hate me. I decided to go with a rosé because the pink, cutesy kind of look of it, I feel like matches the tone of this movie well. But the reason you UK listeners, and I think there's a few of you, you're gonna hate me. It's a French rosé. It's
oh my god.
La Vielle Fermée, so La Vielle Farms, I guess. But it looks nice. But
it looks classy. Is it bubbly? Is it bubbled at
all?
No.
It's just straight rosé. No champagne elements. Although that would make sense with it being French. But that fun fact, I'm sure you know this already, but technically any champagne that doesn't come from the Champagne part of France is not champagne. It's just sparkling wine. And so anytime you see that on the label, they're frauds.
Yes.
They're trying to scam you. But it's like a commonly known thing. But in case any of you listening didn't know, fun fact, if it's not from Champagne, it ain't champagne.
And what I learned from my French class is if you mispronounce the way you pronounce champagne, and you do what I used to do, where you say champagne, or champignon, that's mushrooms. So No, not entirely
The
same
first the
thing.
first pronunciation sounded more Italian. The second one sounded correct, but that is funny that it's not even.
Well, I just
So
remember.
even in French, you say champagne. You don't
Yeah,
say it with like a French
you
ha
know.
ha ha accent.
Because I was doing it. We had this weather project that we had to do. Like he was all about learning how to say different weathers, and I wanted to be funny. So of course I did some research, and I was like, okay, I want to say that it was raining champagne in Champagne, France, and I got points taken off because I pronounced it champignon. And she's like, yeah, okay, so you just said it was raining mushrooms in Mushroom, France. So
If only there was a real mushroom France, then she couldn't have done anything.
I was like, shh, I meant it was raining mushrooms. What are you talking about? But anyway,
Exactly.
Paddington 2, let's get our usual nitty gritty out of the way.
Give
So
me them
the
stats. Give me them.
stats. So this was directed by Paul King, music by Dario Marianelli, who I recognize his name. I looked it up. He also did the score for Atonement, and I love both scores.
Nice.
So
Nice.
I was like, why is the name familiar? But I love both scores. Oh, that's when I love this score. Cinematography is by Eric Wilson. It was written by Paul King and Simon Farnaby. The animated portions of it, like Paddington and his relatives, were done by a company called Framestore. That's a British company. The budget was 40 million, and
Wow, that's really cheap.
the box office was 228 million. There were a whole ton of like awards and stuff it was up for. So just, it was nominated for 44 awards over various film festivals and award shows. And 6 of those awards were essentially for like a best picture status award for whatever the equivalent would have been, at each of these film festivals. It was up for 3 BAFTAs. One of them was for the Best British Film, Best Actor in Supporting Role for Hugh Grant, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Simon Farnaby and Paul King. Playing Paddington, we had Ben Winshaw. Aunt Lucy was played by Imelda Staunton, and for those two, of course, I mean voices. Then Henry was played by Hugh Boonville. Mary, you'll probably recognize, Sally Hawkins.
Yep.
Phoenix was played by Hugh Grant. Knuckles was played by Brendan Gleeson. Judy was played by Madeline Harris. Jonathan by Samuel Jocelyn. Miss Bird was played by Julie Walters. Mr. Gruber was played by Jim Broadbent, who, if you didn't recognize him, I know him as Zeidler in Moulin Rouge.
That's what it is. I recognized him, and I think he was in a Harry Potter film as well.
Well, I know the guy who played Knuckles was what was his name? Was Mad Eye Moody in the Harry Potter films.
Yup, he's a big British actor. He's been in a lot of stuff. But yeah,
Excuse you,
recognize
he's
that
Irish.
Too. Well, you know what I mean.
I know
he's
what you
in
mean.
he's in British films, like an Irish film. Actually, you know what? And I might be watching this soon. He's in the new. I forgot the director's name, but the guy who did In Bruges. It's the Banshees of something or other. It looks interesting. It's one of his dark comedies, so he's in that. It's currently playing, so hopefully I can catch that before it's gone. It looks interesting. Last film that director did was 3 Billboards outside Missouri.
Ebbing,
Missouri.
Yeah. And then finally, Mr. Curry was played by Peter Capaldi. But 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri was what won Best British Film the year that Paddington 2 was up for it. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that was a British film. So I actually don't know what how they classify.
No. So the director is. Maybe we'll talk about one of his films in the future. He comes from the world of theater.
Right.
And his whole thing, he does very, what's the word I'm looking for? Transgressive theater. So he does like very edgy kind of concepts. And like pretty much if you've seen one of his movies, that's what he did on the stage. Like he, Ebbing, Missouri, like the whole premise is this woman, like their kid got murdered and they never figured out who did it, so she's like antagonizing the police by putting the billboards up. It's like, for instance, the new film that I was talking about that's out is about 2 Irish guys, and one of them comes up to him and the other and says like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. And then the guy's just like, but why? I don't want to be friends with you anymore. Don't talk to me. And so it's like him just like that's the whole point of the movie is it's like he's just like desperately like why don't you want to talk to me, and like he won't let it go. So
I would have been like, so this whole movie, this is why I don't want to talk to you. You take everything too far. You made a whole
Knuckles is the one in the new film that's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And then it's what's his face? Anyway, different movie. Maybe I'll be reviewing it later. We'll see. But
so first things first. Yeah. I want to kind of get, because I know we talked about this when I first came out. And I told you at the time I was working for another studio, and I talked about how I first saw it and I was in love with this movie and how great it was. And I talked to somebody at that job who was he was well, first off, hang on. The first time I saw
I know who you're talking about, and for anyone who, I don't know if you've brought this person in your life up in a past episode, but he was like your office nemesis. Like.
Yes, my office nemesis. I guess you could phrase it like that. Well, first off, I want to do a shout out to the Secret Movie Club over in Los Angeles. Craig, hey, they were the ones that screened this movie about 2 years ago, I think, and I saw it and I just fell in love immediately. It was so good.
It had to have been more than 2 years, dude.
That's right.
Because 2 years ago was 2020.
Okay, so maybe 3 years ago?
4 years ago, right?
3 or 4 years ago is when I first saw this. And I told you about it immediately. And I said, oh, this was so good. And then fast forwarding to the current point was I talked to this person at the office and I was like, oh, this is so good. It had, it was a kid's movie, but it took itself, seriously. It wasn't like, oh, we're just a kid's movie sort of thing. I mean, it is, but it isn't. That makes any sort of sense at all. It takes itself seriously where it's not like, and I was reading an article on Game Rant about this by Julianne Unruh. And she said, one of the things that sets this movie apart is the fact that, there's serious actors in this like Hugh Grant and Sally Hawkins, but they take their roles seriously. They're not like, oh, look at me in a kid's movie. Isn't this kind of hilarious? Like winking to the audience sort of thing. But I was talking to this guy at my office about this, and he like did not understand why, or he was actually, I kind of felt like he was kind of upset that I thought this was so good. And, and like, I remember telling you about this. He was like upset.
Well, I've met the person that T is referring to, and he's kind of a bit of a hipster. Apparently, he like I don't even remember what I was talking about at the Christmas party that you invited me to, but I remember he was like apparently like you told me he didn't like an opinion I had, but he was like too intimidated to like argue with me for some reason, which is weird to me. But like
you're not intimidating.
And as I've said on this show, I love hot takes. Give me all the hot takes. I'd much rather have someone have a opinion I think is stupid than an opinion I think is boring.
I mean,
I feel like that's where.
That's why we're such good friends, because I have stupid opinions on a lot.
That's why our show is so fun to listen to, is because we have very opposite tastes on things. But yeah, no, like we talked about this on our Coraline review, but I feel the same way you do. Like writing something off as a kid's movie and just being like, oh, it's a kid's movie. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that it has to be like nothing, or it has to be lesser than quote unquote serious films. Like, we watched Coraline, and that's like a solid horror movie aside from being a kid's movie. Like the idea of what that monster is doing to children is so unnerving, and yet they do it without being super, it's still a PG film.
Right. And I told you, I remember just the trailer freaking me out when she's like, oh, here's some buttons for your eyes. You can be like us. I was like, oh my God, no. I am noping just out of this trailer.
So like for me, like this film, I don't think I'm as enthusiastic about it as you, but I would put this on the same level as like a classic kids film like Mary Poppins or something.
Yeah.
Which that was nominated for Best Picture. Makes me wonder if there were hipsters back in the 60s, turning their chins up at Mary Poppins, which I still think is like one of Disney's best films and an excellent kids film. Or just like family film is a better word for it, because this film, Paddington 2, I think anyone can enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't get a chance to see this when this came out. This is my first time watching it, but I did want to see it, especially when it was getting all of the buzz. You know, like, just because it's a kids movie, if all the critics like it, there's probably a reason for that. And even back when the first Paddington came out, I did want to see it. I think it might have had a limited release or that I might have been busy in college. I don't know, but
I remember seeing. I think it got a wide release in the U.S. because I remember seeing trailers for it like all over like Nickelodeon and Disney and stuff like that.
It might have been because it was like the reviews were good, I remember, but not like Paddington 2, so it might have just been like it did a run and then stopped. Like, the thing is, like, when a film gets good reviews, it tends to stay in theaters longer.
Yeah.
And just based off of the worldwide gross this film had, I'm guessing it was in theaters for a couple of months.
Right.
It was 200 million. It's like that's a lot of time to be out.
Yeah.
But the other thing with this is this is like a beloved children's book franchise, and I never grew up with these books, so I don't have that like nostalgic connection to them or anything. But
well, I mean, like, actually, like, my connection to Paddington, I didn't really have one until I saw this movie. I didn't see the first one. I didn't really know of it as a kid because, like, you have already touched on this, the fact that it's a British icon. I mean, you know, there is some crossover. Like, I've heard references even before these movies came out on like American Dad and stuff to Paddington. So, you know, but it wasn't like something I grew up with. So I didn't have the nostalgia for it either. And
I was more familiar with the stuffed animal than I was with the books.
I don't even think I
actually don't even know if I knew it was. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, Paddington stuffed bears are like, they've been a thing since decades and decades and decades. I'd see stuffed Paddingtons all over the place, but I don't even know if as a kid I knew that it was based on a book. I probably did, but like, again, like I don't know if it's just it was more popular in Britain than over here, but it's just not one of those series I really grew up with.
Well, that's like, well, first off, in my defense, you grew up in a more worldly area than I did. I mean, let's just be fair. But the other thing is, I think you're right. And like, I knew of, I don't know if you knew of like Babar the elephant. I don't know if you knew about it.
Yeah.
But like, no one else.
I never read it as a kid, but I know about it. And that one's wild too, because it's like his father is like a king in Africa or something. Like, yeah, anyway.
But because that was the thing. None of the kids at school knew what I was talking about when I mentioned Bark. My mom happened to have read it at some point growing up, and so, or she'd seen something about it or something, and so we ended up with a couple Babar picture books, and because of that, I knew of Babar, but like no one else did. But it's just one of these things where it's kind of like in the U.S. if you were, you know, in like an area that's more, I guess, like it has more like travel and stuff through it, like I'm sure like major cities like Chicago, you will probably have come across this more than like I had.
Another great example, and I don't know if kids are as familiar with it now, but like when we were kids, Madeline was a big thing, and that was a French book, so super popular in France. I'm sure French kids still grow up reading Madeline and stuff because of the national pride for it and everything. But that's one where I'm curious if kids even know what it is nowadays. Because when we were kids, like there was like a TV show, I think on PBS or something.
It was Playhouse Disney, you know, in the morning.
Exactly. So like it was on TV. It had a live action movie that I do remember seeing as a kid.
Oh, speaking of quick connection, Miss Clavel in the live-action movie was the main character in 3 Billboards. So, all circling back.
That's right. Oh my god. Yeah. No, she's also like the lead in Fargo. Anyway, other movies. But yeah, like I feel like that's kind of a thing too. Like I'm sure in the UK, like this is such a beloved children's book that everyone knows. But I personally didn't grow up reading it. It sounds like you didn't either. So, you know, like it sounds like you didn't even know about the toys, which I know what you're going to be. I know what you're going to be doing as soon as we end this recording.
Well, my younger brother, this past Christmas, last year's Christmas, I guess he had been to some an estate sale at a woman's house. She used to be a stewardess, so she picked up stuff all through the travel. So he actually purchased and brought home an authentic Paddington bear. I think it actually came from England, like from years ago, that he bought for me, and he wrapped it all up and he put it in a. And he took a box and drew on it to make it look like a wooden crate. And he did all that. So yeah, I have an official Paddington bear now. I will say his look has changed over the years, because back when this one was made, he had a yellow hat and he wore red rain boots. So
that's right. I forgot about the yellow hat.
So his look has changed.
It's like a Mandela effect, because now that you're saying that, I'm like, that's right. He had a different colored hat. But like, you forget about that when you see this film. But yeah. I want to hear what you think.
Okay, so we already know I'm going to have very positive things to say about this. I kind of want to know what your first impressions are. You've already said, you weren't as enamored necessarily as I was, but it sounds like you still definitely did enjoy this picture.
Well, so I'm excited for one thing, and that's I've started coining a term on this show, a quote-unquote technically perfect movie. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that I can add this into the category, because when I've used that in the past, we've normally been talking about action movies.
Yeah, for example, Mad Max.
This is a technically perfect movie, and like the script is screenwriting 101 perfect. All of the beats and timing of things are perfect. There's no fat to be trimmed. The Frame Stores, who you said did the animation.
Yeah.
It's incredible, especially if it's like a small company. Like, I love, Disney could take a lesson from this film, because I love how Paddington looks like a photorealistic bear, but they still manage to give him like an expressive face.
Yeah.
Which is not what happened in The Lion King. So, like, honestly, for like a small company doing the animation for it, it's really dang good.
So I don't know how small Frame Stores it seems to be like a go-to though for UK productions. I did briefly look over some of their repertoire, and I did see, that they have done some work on some Harry Potter films. And there was other big one. I can't think of what it is, but so I don't know how big they are, but they seem to be kind of like the go-to for at least UK based shoots that involve special effects or animation.
I hope they win some awards if they haven't already, because this was honestly, like, for a talking bear movie, I really can't praise the CGI enough. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
The music is good. I wouldn't say... It's interesting that you said it was the Atonement composer, because I love that feelings. Score. Yeah. Well, it's like... The music in this is good. I can't really say that it was memorable, because I can't really think of and I only watched this a few days ago, so it's not bad, but it's not like, Harry Potter or something where you're going to be humming along to it. The performances are pitch perfect. The comedy is appropriately appropriate for all ages without being too like kiddie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I normally use that term for well, I don't normally. Like, in the past, I have used that term for much more, like, exciting movies.
Yeah,
so I'm happy I can... This is another example of a technically perfect movie, and that is why I think it got such good ratings from Rotten Tomatoes. And because as a film critic, it's like, yeah, everything, check, 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 check. Like, everything's perfectly fine. There's nothing stupid in the story. Although there's one thing I will mention later, because plot holes, people love to point them out, and it's really stupid sometimes. And there's one thing, I know you're a true crime guy, so there was one thing sticking out in my mind that I'm sure maybe you even thought about, but I'll leave that towards the end.
Oh, I'm curious, but
this is like the thing with everyone saying, "Oh, this is the greatest film of all time" or whatever. I've mentioned this numerous times on the show, but like that whole thing is such a stupid, like, we've talked about Citizen Kane and all. It's like the idea of the greatest film of all time. It's so stupid because there are different genres. So like, how do you even compare this to Citizen Kane? Like, they're very different kinds of movies.
Yeah.
So like, the whole Rotten Tomatoes has been making internet nerds angry for like 10 years or more, and it's so funny every time it happens. I'm sure you remember years ago when a bunch of DC fans were trying to like get it shut down because they thought that it was being unfair to DC movies, which is hilarious because Warner Brothers owns Rotten Tomatoes.
The irony.
So
if
anything, it's like, wow, Warner Brothers is really fair. They could just like, you know, be hiding bad scores or whatever. But it's like the same thing with this
Amazon.
movie. If anyone,
that's Amazon with IMDb.
Yes,
they actually.
Oh God, yeah, that's right.
Rings of Power.
Jesus. But anyway, it's the same. If anyone got upset, like most people just thought it was funny that this was so highly rated. Like I don't think anyone thought it was undeserved if they saw it, you know? Like if anyone got upset that this was so highly rated, I think they need to maybe seek therapy or something because it is a good movie. Like again, after seeing it, I can see why it's rated so high. And that's the other thing too, is like all the other quote unquote technically perfect movies we've talked about on this show have all been perfectly, you know, I the two off the top of my head are Terminator 2 and Mad Max.
Yeah.
And it's like those also got quite a bunch of good reviews. And maybe it's because everything was perfectly done. Like, you know, for their specific genres and stuff. Like the special effects were good, the writing was solid, the acting was solid. It's just a good movie. And that's kind of what I find so funny is like when people get so wrapped up in this, like in case anyone listening doesn't know, Rotten Tomatoes is a review aggregator. It collects all of the reviews from all of the critics and creates a percentage based on the positive to negative. That's all it does. And it's really just there to see like, oh, what does the general consensus seem to be on the movies? And that's also why Citizen Kane is lower rated than this. You thought it was really funny. Like some negative review was unearthed, which dropped it down like a percentage.
Well, just touch on a couple things you said. One, referring to what's the greatest movie of all time. I was reading an article or something because I was trying to do some research on, you know, the Rotten Tomatoes situation, and I forget who it was, but somebody said, and I agree, it really just depends. Whatever you consider the greatest, you know, film ever, it really depends on your own personal taste and your own personal genre. Because at the end of the day, what you consider the greatest movie ever made only really matters to you. And it's always influenced by your own personal taste and preferences.
And if you want to just go based on like the consensus of what most people think,
you're boring.
Then technically, Rotten Tomatoes is the perfect way to go because critics and audience score, you can see just what the general population thinks of the movie.
Did I ever tell you?
At the end of the day,
did I ever tell you about my first experience with Rotten Tomatoes?
No.
So remember when we talked about, and I thought I would have, maybe didn't. Remember when we watched the movie Down with Love for the Lonely Hearts Club this year, and I remember that I've always loved that movie, and I was watching it in college, freshman year, and there was some girl down my hallway that I wanted to invite her, and so she was like, "Oh well, what's it rated at in Rotten Tomatoes?" Like that was her first question, and I was like, what's Rotten Tomatoes? So that was my first experience with it, and she wouldn't watch it because it was rated less than, I think, 70 or something. Which in retrospect, I'm like, you're a boring person, my God.
Rotten Tomatoes has been around a while, and it's funny. Like, if you go in high school, I remember a bunch of me and my friends at the computer lab were sitting around a computer, and we were just typing in a bunch of classic movies to see what their score was. And it was kind of funny because I remember, like, I think Titanic had like an 89 or something.
Right.
Like, that's the other thing with Rotten Tomatoes is, again, like, it's an aggregator. So, like, that's a percentage of the people that liked it. So even these movies that are super celebrated, like Titanic, you know, won Best Picture. Up until Lord of the Rings, it won the most Oscars out of any movie in history.
Yeah.
And it has an 89 because some critics just didn't like it. And I'd recommend anyone listening to the show do that for fun. Go onto Rotten Tomatoes, look up a bunch of famous movies and see what their scores are, because it is funny because, you know, and again, it shows just how stupid it is for people to take it too seriously.
Yeah.
Because, like, a lot of it is very deeply personal. And if you want to get technical about, like, what's the greatest film of all time, technically Rotten Tomatoes is a great tool because you're seeing what the general population thinks.
Yeah.
But then you also have things like AFI. It's just, the whole thing is stupid because, again, like, you really can't compare a lot of films differently. based on that, because it's like, yeah, this is the greatest this kind of film of all time, or this kind of film, and then you're going to have like quote unquote experts disagreeing about it. So it's
and then there's even
the whole
just
thing
like,
is so nebulous. It just doesn't. It's not even worth arguing about.
right.
Like,
And then there's just like, there's cultural differences. I think there's a magazine. I think it's a film magazine over in the UK. It's called Empire.
Yeah.
And my mom happened to be in London one year when they'd put out a list of like their current list of what Empire considers to be the top 100 movies of all time. And so, of course, for me, my first question is, well, where's Gone with the Wind added on there? Because in the US, it's in the top 10. I think it's at number 4 right now. And like in Empire, it was like number like 75. And it's just because cultural differences also affect how you perceive films. And so, but like you said, it's so subjective. It's almost like, is it a question even worth asking?
I actually dare you go, like, if you got your phone right now, let's see what the tomato meter says for Gone with the Wind. Like I was saying, it's a fun activity. Go on to Rotten Tomatoes, look up a bunch of famous movies, and see what their score is.
Okay.
Was Rotten Tomatoes T?
Okay.
What is Gone with the Wind?
Okay, I'm checking right now. Ew, gross. Goodfellas is on the main page. I'm just being petty. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, search. What do you mean search? Oh, here we go. It's like, what do you mean search of all? It is at 90%. It's certified fresh. And the audience score,
only 90%. How can the greatest film of all time have 10%? But this is what I mean. Like, even all of these like super celebrated, critically acclaimed films do not have perfect scores. In fact, I noticed when I was watching Paddington, because it had like the tomato meter up in like the corner of the screen or whatever. When this came out, it was at 100%.
Yeah.
Now it's at 99.
Yeah. And
which still is hilarious that it's still like almost perfect. But like, you go. Like, someone is not going to like the movie. So
it was. I was reading on Wikipedia. It was at 100% until I believe March 2021, and I believe that's kind of when this whole meme got stirred up about Citizen Kane versus Paddington 2. And then all of a sudden somebody wrote a negative review of it. It's like they almost wrote it just to bring it down that percentage. Because I'm like, seriously, you reviewing it now?
Probably. But yeah,
but that's what brought it down to 99%.
It's just a fun little, you can turn it into a game. Like, have, get some friends over, get some drinks, and like have people guess the percentage of famous movies.
What is it? Wait, now while we're on the subject, just really quick, we will return to Paddington shortly after these brief messages. What is your favorite movie of all time?
I feel like we've talked about this. I don't have one. I've got like a list of like 10.
Okay.
Because again,
throw me one of them.
Well, I've told you A Clockwork Orange is one of them. The Shining, Alien, Night of the Hunter, The Seventh Seal.
Oh, I'm sorry. A Clockwork Orange is 88%. Sorry.
Oh no, I've got
You're
bad
devastated.
taste. Well, that's the thing though, is I don't even like another one that isn't at 100% anymore. Get Out, when it came out, Jordan Peele's film, like it was at 100% for weeks and weeks and weeks, and that was kind of oh my god, like this movie's apparently amazing. We all need to see it. Now I don't think it's at 100%. It's probably still in the 90s, but
98%.
No movie. There you go. But no movie is going to be at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes unless it's just so old that you can't find any negative reviews. But,
like
and then
they thought would happen with Citizen Kane, but they found one.
And that's the other end of Rotten Tomatoes, which makes it good too, is that if you don't like film critics and think they're pretentious and have their heads up their butts, audience score exists. That's just any Joe Schmo. And that's also kind of a funny thing to see what the audience score is versus the critics. I actually wonder if Paddington's audience score is as high as its critics score. I would think that it is. Again, like who's going to say, well, I shouldn't say that. There's all sorts of stupid reviews on the internet, but
let me see. So Paddington 2. Okay, let's see what the audience score is.
75.
Okay, so it is at 88%, and I will tell you why. This is my theory. because
I think people went on to like ruin it or something.
yeah, basically
Honestly.
that's why, because it used to not be that low. Because when something's certified fresh, or technically the percentage that people or will put on stuff and tend to usually care about the most is the review one. That's what gets you certified fresh or certified rotten. The audience score is just people going on and leaving who don't understand how rotten. Well, in this case, people don't understand how Rotten Tomatoes works, so they try to go and leave a bunch of negative reviews to bring it down, not realizing
Well,
that doesn't certify into its fresh rating.
And that's something I find interesting when that happens. It'll often get me interested in seeing the movie as if the audience versus the critics score is off. Like an example of the critics liking something, but the fans hating it is Star Wars Episode 8. And then on the side of critics hating it, but audiences really liking it, would be Venom. And both of those movies are interesting in their own right because they're good in some ways and bad in others. And it also just kind of shows you what people versus critics kind of value in a film. But moral of the story, kiddos, is that Rotten Tomatoes is stupid if you take it that seriously. Frankly, like film criticism is stupid if you take it that seriously. We hope you're just listening to the show to hear our hot voices talk to you. But
his is sultry, mine is sweet.
Right?
That's what
besides being a technically perfect movie, I enjoyed this just fine. Mary Poppins is like one of my all-time favorite like childhood films, so me saying that it's as good as Mary Poppins is a very big compliment.
Well, thank you.
I think this is great.
Compliment.
I think it's great. It's very heartwarming. It's very sweet. I love Paddington. I would love to hang out with him if he were real. And that's kind of what makes him so likable. And it's sort of like the whole premise of this movie is he goes to jail and makes friends with all the prisoners.
Yeah.
And that's like his character. Like he's just so likable. Like I'm not necessarily a warm and fuzzy kind of guy, but I would love if that bear lived in my neighborhood.
Right. Well, like even like you saw how he interacts with the people in his circle. Like, everybody just loves him. Just because, not necessarily because they loved chatting with him, hanging out with him, but because he was just a kind person.
He's just a positive force. Like, you even see it when he's in jail and the neighborhood has gone to crap, because he's not there to make sure that one lady gets breakfast and make sure that guy doesn't get locked out of his apartment and stuff.
Yeah.
One thing that was brought up a lot when this film came out that I was curious to see when I saw it was a lot of people were saying like this was about prison reform or something, and kind of like I do see where they're coming from. I mean,
it's a kids movie, so they can't get into the hard details of what needs to change, or a family movie as we've decided to call them. However, I do think it's important to plant the idea, that sounds bad, that treating people like human beings can't have a negative effect, I think was what it was, is the basic general idea. So it does kind of touch on that topic. Yeah, because it's not going to be in depth. We're saying this is what needs to be done to fix everything, but it's putting the idea in, especially with a family movie. If we want to talk about, I'm not trying to say it's brainwashing people or anything, but it's basically putting in that idea that when you treat people like human beings, there's nothing negative that can come really from that.
Exactly. And like, I guess we'll get into, because another thing, some people take dissecting movies a little too far with plot holes.
Yeah.
Again, I think I've just got that Red Letter Media review stuck in my head because it was a lot of them were talking about like plot holes in Barbarian and stuff that weren't really plot holes because, and I've brought this up in past reviews, what you call it in screenwriting and in film school is suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Because ridiculous things happen in movies all the time, and it's just, can you believe that it's happening while you're watching it? Or, like, can you suspend your disbelief and just roll with it? And kind of with the whole prison reform thing, the one big flaw I could see some nitpicker getting into is it's like, well, what did these people do in prison?
Yeah, I know.
Like, if someone, like, was getting frisky with kids or was like a mass murderer or something, then you probably wouldn't feel as happy about them being treated friendly by a little bear.
Yeah.
But again, like this operates on storybook logic. Like, they're all just probably petty thieves or whatever.
Yeah.
But that is kind of the one side. Like in reality, prison reform, especially like for me, It's more for like people who did things like drug related. Like,
Yeah.
should they really be like tortured or like put in solitary confinement and beaten and stuff? No. But this film just kind of takes broad strokes and just being like, we should treat people well, even if they necessarily don't deserve it.
Yeah.
And speaking of the nitpicks, I'm wondering if you notice this too. Again, this is stupid to even bring up because it's a kid, storybook logic. But one thing that I thought was really funny, and I wondered if you would pick up on because you're such a true crime person, is how completely absurd it is that Paddington would go to jail. Because in reality, first off, I don't know if it's the same way in the UK, but here in the US, if he stole from the store owner would have to press charges.
Yeah.
Which in the movie, the store owner's like, oh, I don't think he did it. It's so like right there, if this were real, of course, talking bears don't exist either. But if there was a talking bear who was framed for stealing something, if that store owner didn't want to press charges, Paddington he'd be fine.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that is even more glaring that I thought was really funny is, again, if this were real, if a talking bear was framed for stealing a pop-up book, you would need the pop-up book.
Yeah, I mean,
you would need that to convict him.
Yeah.
And it drove me crazy. I was like,
well, where's the pop-up book?
Like, the whole court thing is just based on, like, a bunch of random people's testimony, most of which are in Paddington's favor. So I'm just like, and again, like, this is suspension of disbelief. It's like a storybook kids movie kind of thing. Like, so of course, like, oh, the sad bear went to jail, but I just thought it was really funny because I'm like, there's no way he'd be convicted in real life. First off, because there's no evidence. You can't just, oh, he was running from the scene and they found marmalade. It's like, cool. So where's the stolen item?
Where's the stolen item?
Did he drop the boat?
Did he stash it somewhere? Like, you haven't proven. Like, remember, especially, I hadn't thought about that until today when I watched it again. I actually watched it like 5 hours today before where we recorded because I'm like, I've seen this like 9,000 times. I'm just gonna refresh really quick. But I actually thought about this and I was like, wait, but then at the end when they were like, oh, okay, we need some actual proof that he did this. Bring me the pop-up book with his fingerprints on it. I'm like, why? You didn't need the pop-up book with fingerprints on it to convict Paddington.
I must stress that this is a stupid thing to get caught up on. It's one of those things I was thinking about when watching the movie, but it's just funny. Like, the first thing was the lack of evidence to convict Paddington. And then the second thing I was thinking about just yesterday, where I'm like, wait a second, the store owner didn't even want him to go to jail. There. Again, it's like the cops can't, again, I don't know if it's different in the UK, but at least here, it's like if the store owner doesn't want to press charges, then they let Paddington go.
Yeah,
so
like we just don't know how it works in the UK. I do know in certain cases, in the US, the state can step in and press charges,
but not for a stolen.
Not for stolen. Yeah, most likely not.
Shop.
But yeah, no, you're right. It's just like, so why was it? Well, they did have some evidence from that the same. Remember, he was like, we found pop prints here, and here.
No, as I said, they had it was marmalade. But again, it's stupid. It's the sort of thing like someone who wants their movies to be realistic always, even when there is a talking bear. It was something I thought of, and because I know you get really nitpicky with your true crime stories, I'm like, ooh, I wonder if T thought of that as well.
I mean, I am very much
just wouldn't work.
I'm very much the person who, when they watch like true crime shows, and they're like, oh, this person is a monster. I hate them. I have to go to jail. And then when they do the one thing that they trip up on them, and I'm like, what an idiot. It's like,
right.
I wanted to kind of just comment something you said way earlier. We were talking about this being a technically perfect movie, and that's one of the things that I think has kind of really helped cement its status. And I'm so happy you picked up on this. This is a movie, like you said, there's no excess really fat to trim. And one of the big things for me is literally everything in this movie pays off at some point. Nothing is just like a random fact. Do you know what I mean?
It's another talking point on the show, very frequently set up and payoff, and I know exactly what you're talking about. With
literally
everything with the
back.
Family, exactly.
Well,
the reason they tell you to put that in your screenplays when you're taking screenwriting class is because of makes the audience feel satisfied. There's almost like, I wonder if dopamine gets shot into your brain when you feel when something comes back. But like, it even goes back to like before screenwriting. It's the Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
If there's a gun in the first act, it needs to go off before the end. And you're perfectly right. There's a lot of that. The stuff I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is it sets up a bunch of stuff with the family. The kid likes trains. The girl's reporting stuff. The dad's going through a midlife crisis. I forgot what's going on with the mom.
She wants to swim across the English Channel.
I guess she doesn't really do that until the very end of the movie. But
remember, she dives in the water and she's able... She pencil dives, and then she goes in and she's able to hold her breath in the water a lot longer and help Paddington for as long as she could.
That's right. I will say that one criticism someone could have is the prisoners showing up to save Paddington at the end could be called a Deus Ex Machina, because it's like, how did they see the train? How would they know that was Paddington that went over? So I will say that is a little bit of a stretch, but not to the point of like ruining the movie.
Yeah, it wasn't like they were in Peru seconds ago or something, where you're like, and now they're here. What?
You do establish they're in the plane, they're flying over the countryside, so it's plausible that they're there. I just will say that it's a little silly that they would be able to pick out, oh, hey, that train just fell into the water. I bet that's Paddington.
Clearly it, yeah.
And also them like crashing the plane to get there and just being right there in the nick of time. Anyway, like I will say that could be considered a Deus Ex Machina, but whatever.
I don't think they crashed the plane. I think the plane is one of those ones where it can land on water. It has the little pontoon things on the bottom of it.
It might be. I don't think you see the plane before. I think after they rescue Paddington, it just cuts to them back in London and stuff. But will say, just to show that I'm not giving this film too much overwhelming support, like that.
He's like, I need to find something wrong.
You could nitpick that. I don't think it really matters all that much, because they don't. It just happens and they move on. I will say, and you told me that Nicole Kidman is the villain in the first film.
Yes.
It was very fun seeing Hugh Grant in something after he was basically sent out on a barge to die from Hollywood after he had his prostitute problem in the early 2000s.
Well, his problem was he wasn't a producer. If he was a producer, he would have gotten away with it.
Man, I forgot. Do you like Love Actually?
Not really. I mean, I thought
that
it was
film
okay.
hits so That film hits so different when you watch it now, with Hugh Grant creeping on his assistant as the prime minister.
See, I didn't even think about it that way. I thought it was just creepy, just overall. There's a couple couples in that movie. There's the one with Colin Firth. For some reason, to me, that was kind of creepy too. I don't know why, but
was he the one? Was he the one that learns Portuguese?
I think that's him. I think that's
one. That one's so cute. I love that one. I love the one with Mr. the Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins with his weird porn shoots or whatever they are.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's a body double.
He's like a stand. Yeah, he's like a stand-in. That one was funny. I don't know. That movie, it's a mixed bag, but
I just remember. But yeah, that's like one of my dad's favorites, and so he always talks about how funny this movie is, how much he loves it. And I finally got a chance to watch, when I became of age, and I was kind of just like, this is it. And unfortunately, with him and the rom-coms that he likes, he's a big rom-com fan, and he's always recommended to me. That's kind of always been the case. I finally get a chance to watch it because he tends to like R-rated rom-coms, and I finally watched it. And I'm just like, this is it.
I liked it. It's one of the ones, I mentioned this in 500 Days of Summer, but when I would say I don't like rom-coms, there were always people like, oh, you'll like this one. And that was one that was recommended that I did end up liking. But as I said, it's a mixed bag. I like some of the stories and I don't like others.
I like the one with the kid. That was so sweet.
It's just funny that Hugh Grant, he disappeared for a long time. I don't know if I've even seen him in anything besides this recently, but it was nice seeing him as the villain because he's very good at it. Did
you watch the entire credit scene?
I believe so. I watched until it stopped showing the little musical number.
Oh yeah, okay. I want to make sure you saw the musical number.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love it. It's like later on at the prison, and it's Hugh Grant's like review, and he's wearing like a sparkly pink, what is it called, a prison uniform. I thought that was just kind of just that to me just odd and hilarious, and I love it. But
That's the other reason I chose rosé for my drink was
like,
the pink striped pajamas.
Right? I'm like, I kind of want that outfit now. I think that outfit could work. But
Next Halloween costume, you could go as Knuckles.
I'll go as Knuckles.
Well, I guess he didn't. That was kind of an interesting thing. His uniform was saved from the fiasco. He's like the only prisoner without the pink.
Yeah, I think it's because all of his chef's wear stuff is kept in the kitchen. But yeah, so
or maybe
like
he
said,
just never changes his clothes.
like this
Gross.
This movie touched on, like you said, prison reform again in a family friendly manner, but it does. And the other thing it really touches on is kind of one of the issues that got all wrapped up within Brexit, even though Brexit didn't happen until 2020. You know, they've been talking about it for several years.
I thought Brexit happened in 2016. I remember people talking about it
people were
the
talking
same time
about
as
it.
the election.
People were talking about it for years, but it technically did not happen. And I looked this up. Brexit went into place at January 31st, 2020. But they had been talking. It was such a huge deal. They were talking about it.
I guess it
for
got
years.
voted in 2016, and they just hadn't implemented it until 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
The end of the transition period was January 2021. But anyway, the point is a lot of, and kind of like we're seeing in our country, a lot of proponents of among the common people had to do with, you know, racism, people outside of our country coming in, and just because they weren't from here or didn't look like us, they were suspicious. Not all. I mean, I'm not saying all people, but that was you know, a hot point with this that people were talking about with this. And that is something that is also, that one's more obvious. It's touched on. We have the block captain or whatever the heck he is talking about how foolish they were to take in somebody who was different. I don't like him. He's not from here. That sort of stuff too. So that's also something that's talked about in this. You know,
well, I don't think it's. I mean, I don't know if it's the same in the children's books, but I do think it's interesting that he's from Peru, or not Peru. He's from South America.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I remember hearing that when the first movie came out, and I was like, really? That's where he's from? I didn't even know there were bears in South America. But that does kind of work with the whole foreigner thing, too. Like, he's not just a bear. He's a Latino bear.
He's a Latin bear. I'm double checking this. Where is Paddington from? Because I know it's somewhere in South America, and I forget what.
I thought it was Peru, but I might be wrong.
Okay, I can't find it right now, but I think for some reason I think it is Peru, and the reason I'm thinking this is because there is a Paddington 3 in the works, and it's like it's called Paddington in Peru or something like that. So I don't know.
Good. I kind of want to see his home. Like, I loved that was something I really liked too. Was like seeing his, the whole how he was adopted and everything like that.
Well, if you watch the first one, there's a bit more of his life in Peru, because it's all about, the first one's really all about how he
got to London.
Yeah.
And
found the Browns.
It's interesting. It's always funny when a sequel does better than the original, like Terminator 2 or The Dark Knight or Paddington 2. And I do and that was kind of, I decided not to watch the original. It looked like it was on Netflix right now. But I was like, with this being quote unquote the greatest film of all time, it should be able to stand on its own. Part of the reason
it does.
Like when we watched Terminator 2, I told you not to bother with the first one because it stands on its own. And I think this is the same way. I got the gist of it. Okay, he's a bear from South America. He lives in London now. Last film, he got adopted by this family, and he's living in their house with them as a family member. I get it, and it just had like a fun premise and stuff. So yeah, I'm stoked for a Paddington 3, especially if they go back to Peru or whatever South American country he's from.
So what's interesting about this movie stands its own, and I think you will actually appreciate this, because I know you've always said that you think reference humor is very lazy. It's kind of just, yes, we all know this exists, ha ha ha, whatever.
Hey T, have you seen Star
Oh
Wars?
my
Have you
god.
seen Lord of the Rings? Oh
What
my
even?
god, he said the thing from the movie I've seen before.
So first off, I love that voice. You need to do that more often. Start introducing the podcast that way.
Hey guys, have you seen this movie we're talking about? It's got lines that we can quote in the future.
So the good thing about this is there are references to the first film. However, none of it is just serves as a reference. It all has to
You
do
can
with the
tell
plot.
because I didn't even know there were references
Exactly.
to the first film.
The big one, I didn't get until I saw the first movie, is, remember when he talks about when they go and talk to that security guard, he's like, yeah, this nun went crazy. Push the thing off. It happens. They're cooped up. Hey, you sister, get back in line. That guy.
Yeah.
He's a security guard at another place that they're trying to break into in the first one. And he kept talking about how she was like the prettiest nun ever or something in this movie. So in the first movie, they're breaking into some place, I forget what it is, and they have the dad, Mr. Brown, dressed as a woman to get in, and he's working security guard there, but he also flirts with her. Flirts with the dad, thinking she's this gorgeous woman. So again,
That's actually interesting because I thought that he was saying that because, and I feel like other characters said it in this film where no matter what disguise that actor was wearing, everyone was like, oh my gosh, what a handsome homeless man, or what a pretty nun. Like, I thought like the joke was that he was so handsome that any character he was playing was like very attractive. So it's like, oh, he's a nun. Oh, that really hot nun that...
that hot nun, as we often say.
That's how I interpreted the joke. I thought it was just like,
See,
whoever he's dressed at, everyone always thinks that he's really attractive.
Exactly. That's the point. It's a reference and it's its own standalone joke. So it's not just like, hey, did you see the first movie?
Gotcha.
And I thought you would appreciate that, because I feel like that's a developed sense of referential humor.
Well, this is a funny movie. It's not like super laugh out loud. Like, if you're desensitized like me, you're not going to be rolling on the floor. But there were a lot of moments that made me chuckle. And I found out, because I watched this on Amazon, and how they have like, by the director. And I found out this director works on one of my favorite comedy shows, The Mighty Boosh.
Okay, you're going to have to fill me in here.
So it's a... You know what? Do you remember the viral video from years and years ago, Old Greg?
I think so. Maybe.
You might have been too young.
I
like,
probably
even though
was.
I'm not that much older than you, but like, anyway, like, so it's this comedy show about these two zookeepers in London, and they get into these really like psychedelic adventures.
Oh my god!
They meet monsters, and they do all, but it's very like crazy and weird. It's right up my alley, my sense of humor, and it also like appealed to. It's funny. The show was really popular when I went to Scotland when I was 16. The camp I went to was like Mighty Boosh themed, and I slowly came to the realization like, wait, this is the show that Old Greg is from and stuff. Anyway, but it really, in the UK it was really popular. It appealed to like the Hot Topic kids and stuff because it had all these wild costumes and musical numbers and stuff, and eventually Adult Swim started airing it, and that's where I actually saw episodes in context. And now, I know for a while it was on Amazon Prime. I think for a while Netflix had it. It's a really good show. It only ran for 3 seasons. It's super funny, but the director, I guess, directed some episodes of The Mighty Boosh. So
okay.
I think he's got some comedy chops, and I think he brought that into this, even though he had to be very age appropriate.
And another TV connection, not quite as interesting as yours, but for any of you people out there that are Friends fans, the judge in this movie is the same actor who played Emily's dad when Ross says the wrong name at the altar. So that was fun. But so we've also talked about sort of like the legacy of this movie and, how it's kind of gone on. And it's almost kind of like it's developed sort of this like mythological status, kind of, at least in the internet meme world. So you appreciate this. Did you see The Unbearable Weight of a Massive Talent or something like that?
That's the Nick Cage movie, right?
Yeah, the one that's about Nick Cage where he basically plays himself.
It looked funny. I haven't seen it. I've heard it's good. I'm happy Nick Cage is finally getting some recognition. Pig was really good last year and stuff, but that movie, I was kind of like, I'm getting tired of, like, again, I'm happy, especially because there was a time when he kind of, I don't think, was aware of like how popular he was for his wackier roles.
Yeah.
So I'm glad he's in on the joke. I'm glad he knows about all the memes, not the bees, all that stuff. But I feel like because of that, like he's just saying yes to a lot of, like, for instance, there was sort of a movie that came out last year that was based on Five Nights at Freddy's.
They finally came out with a movie and I missed it.
It's not, they can't legally call it Five Nights at Freddy's. But anyway, Nick Cage starred in it and it looked terrible, and apparently it was terrible. And part of why they got Nick Cage was because of his manic energy, but then they also had him not say any dialogue in the movie. Whatever.
Okay.
I'm going off on a tangent, but I didn't see it. I heard it's good. So, it just kind of came out at a time when I was really sick of like the Nick Cage mania that was going on.
I mean, I know I'm boring. I know of Nick Cage. I think he's a good actor. I didn't think he was this mythological unicorn that he's kind of achieved now. However,
he's good at being crazy. That's why, and that's what I'm glad he learned that about himself, because for a while he was actually in financial trouble and he was kind of saying yes to any movie. Uh-huh. So I'm glad he learned his strengths. He's been in some good stuff like Color Out of Space, Pig. He wasn't even a crazy person. That movie, if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. But anyway, like, I'm glad he's back to being in hit movies, and I'm glad he's hopefully taken care of all of his crazy debts.
Well, the point is that in that movie, there's a character played by Pedro Pascal who's supposed to be like this cinephile friend of Nicolas Cage's character. And his friend goes on and on about how much he loves Paddington too. And
as I said, man, if you hate this movie because it's popular, you're just a fake movie fan, in my opinion. That or you're just not being honest, because maybe it's not your thing. But again, like, if you're just basing this off of like basic film criticism, like, and giving it a fair shot, making good faith arguments, it's a good movie. Maybe you don't like it, but like, again, if you're just being fair to the movie, I'm not surprised it got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, because after seeing it, it checks all the boxes, man. It's technically perfect. It's like a perfectly made movie.
And his character, his character goes on and on about this, and he says, and he was like, well, why? He's like, because it made me want to be a better person. And so Nicolas Cage's character finally watches it, because he was like, whatever, it's a kid's movie, I'm not that into it. And by the end of it, his character is like in tears. Like, he's just so moved by this movie. So like, but I'm like, basically the point is what I'm saying is this movie has such a status now that it's being referenced by movies that are quote unquote trying to be taken seriously. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Movie's kind of a comedy, but I know what you mean. Like, again, it's because the title sounds really pretentious, but it's being ironic.
Well, no,
what's also funny about that line is that it turns out Pedro Pascal's character is a drug lord. So the idea of him saying that the movie made him wanted to be a better person is kind of funny, because you find out later that he's like murdering people and stuff.
Oh, I see. Well,
it's a comedy. I guess you don't know much about I haven't even seen the film.
I knew it was a comedy. I didn't know it was that. Kind of a little disappointed, because that's usually when they cast Latinos in roles, they usually end up making them be drug lords on stuff. So that's a little disappointing. Well, I mean, he is also the Mandalorian. Let's not forget. That's true. That's true. I'm not disappointed in him. I'm just disappointed that that's the direction they took that role.
Well, the character he's playing is based on I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Who's the famous drug lord from you know who I'm talking about?
Pablo Escobar?
Yes, that's who he's supposed to be. Like, they made a fake character, but basically the premise is that Pablo Escobar is a big Nick Cage fan, and so he invites him to like go hang out with him. But then the feds or this DEA or whoever are like, okay, Nick Cage, you're going in undercover or whatever. And that's the premise of the movie, essentially. So I haven't seen it. Maybe it turns out Pedro Pascal isn't actually a drug lord. But that's, again, as I said, I think that's part of what's supposed to be funny about that line is like that this drug lord loves Paddington 2, and the line about like, oh, it made me want to be a better person when he's like, you know.
Got it. You know what that kind of sounds like to me, though? That kind of sounds like another iteration of, you remember that controversial movie that came out a few years ago, The Interview?
So it sounds like a complete copy of The Interview to be, and that's another reason I kind of skipped it when it came out. Again, it's apparently a great movie. I haven't seen it, but when I saw what it was about, I was like, isn't this kind of like The Interview, but probably better made?
Yeah. So, but then, okay, so we talked about, you know, kind of like the legacy of this movie too, and how it's kind of its own thing. I'm a little disappointed that it was kind of snubbed by the Academy for something, because a lot of the awards and stuff it was getting at these film festivals or being nominated for was for its script and for Hugh Grant's performance, and neither of those were acknowledged. And I do think it's because at least the American Academy seems to have a problem or trying to always pick a movie that's, you know, it's Academy worthy, what they want their legacy to be. And
you know what? And this isn't even a jab at Black Panther, but if Black Panther can be nominated for Best Picture, I think this should have been nominated for Best Picture. It probably wouldn't have won.
No, it wouldn't have. But it makes, like you said, it's a technically perfect movie.
And that's the thing. I didn't have a problem with Black Panther being nominated for Best Picture, but again, like, why? This is the reason a lot of people don't watch the Oscars and feel like they're out of touch. And the reason Oscar bait is a term people use is because there are types of movies the Academy really likes, to the point where it's almost predictable which movies are going to win. Like, well, if it's a period piece, if it's a musical, if it's
a Holocaust film.
Yeah, like, it's ridiculous. And that's kind of what's so funny about them making Black Panther Best Picture nominee, is they were almost kind of doing it to get people to watch the Academy Awards. But it's like, again, like, Paddington 2 is technically one of the greatest films of all time, according to Rotten Tomatoes, and also one of the best films of that year.
Yeah.
So why is it not going? I said at the beginning of, let me bring it back to what I said at the beginning of this episode. Mary Poppins was up for Best Picture when it came out, when there were only 5 nominees for Best Picture at the time.
Right.
So what's up, man? Like, I'm not as big of a fan of this film as you, but I do think I agree with you. Like, I think it should have been up for some more awards. I really think the animation was incredible.
Because it's so realistic looking, but like you said, it's real. It's not so realistic that we have expressionless characters. It's realistic enough where it seems like he's actually there and interacting with things, and it's believable. But also, he's still, you know, cartoony enough to where he has expressions and eyes and stuff. Like, fabulous example, The Hard Stare.
Oh boy. Heaven help you if Aunt Lucy gives you the hard stare.
The hard stare. It's what we give people when they've forgotten their manners. But yeah, this is just such, you know, this is a good, you know, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it, because I'm not trying to imply that a movie has to be wholesome to be good, but I feel like very few wholesome movies are good. Do you know what I mean? I think of, like, when I hear wholesome, I think of, like, you know, the Hallmark Channel or something, and, you know, it kind of fills the wholesome itch, but it's like they're not really that good.
A lot of it is, you know, you think about another great example is like ratings. When you watch the Academy Awards, a lot of the big winners are often rated R.
Yeah.
Like, I remember you saying in some past episode, like, oh, R is the rating you want. No, it isn't. The R is the rating you want if you want the movie to win awards. If you want it to make money, you want it to be PG-13.
Yeah.
Because it's the perfect, all the little kids want to see it because it's, like, for older kids, and the parents can take the kids to it and still enjoy it. Like, that's why Marvel movies do so well, is because they're right in that perfect They can be a little edgy, but not too edgy, and that's where you make all your money. It just goes back to like people don't take kids movies too seriously unless they're Disney movies. That's another great example of,
and that's so sad because I mean, like people. I remember when this came out. I remember Celebrate Directors. I remember Guillermo del Toro tweeting about how good this movie was and how much he enjoyed it. I mean, and that dude like literally doesn't promote anything unless he actually likes it. So it wasn't just like, oh, I saw this and I enjoyed it. For him to put that out there, he's like, yeah, I really like this. I think the only other time I remember him really doing that for a major studio release was I think he did that. I know he did that for Pig, and I think he also did it for Ready or Not, which he and I parted ways in Ready or Not because I didn't think Ready or Not was that good. But he doesn't do that very often. So I'm going to talk about for a celebrated Oscar-winning director to take his time and tell people, hey, this is a great movie. Y'all should go see this. You know, hello. It's like, what, is the Academy asleep at the table? Like, what are they doing?
Well, and that's kind of another thing people get tired of is that Disney wins everything every year, especially for animated features, and it's like,
but this wasn't even
like
up for an animated
that's the
feature.
one except. Well, that's like the one exception people make, right? It's like, you know, a lot of Oscar winners are not very wholesome unless it's a Disney movie, and then it wins automatically. And I'm with you. I think this should have gotten more award nominations just because it's like, unless it's a Disney movie, sweep it aside. You know, like, This is why, like, I kind of root for, like, if there's an animated film that I like better during the, like, I often root against Disney during the Academy Awards just so someone else gets it. Like, very recently, I was so happy Into the Spider-Verse won Best Animated Feature.
Right.
One, because it was nice that Sony finally, like, made, like, a really good hit. The animation style was super unique. It was a superhero movie that felt fresh, which is saying a lot these days.
Yeah.
And it kicked Disney in the gonads. It made them, oh, hey, man, we can't just coast all the time now. So, yeah, I think it's a little ridiculous that this wasn't up for a couple of awards, especially like special effects and at least Best Picture. You know what's funny? At least according to Amazon, this came out in 2018. That would have been the same year that Black Panther came out. So literally in the same year, it's like, oh, you're going to give a Best Picture to Black Panther, but not to Paddington? What's up with that?
Yeah.
Is it because it's too kiddie? It's too family friendly?
It's too family
friendly. Didn't used to be the case.
I mean, and I get mad when I think of that, and I think of like that year that Bridesmaids was nominated for Best Picture, and I was like, are you kidding me? Do you remember that year?
I can't believe I forgot that it was nominated for Best Picture, and it's a great movie. Don't get me wrong, but really, I can't believe. I believe you. I'm just like,
I have never seen Bridesmaids. I had to read the script for it for one of my classes.
It's really good.
And I was like, why is this called Bridesmaids? Shouldn't this really be called, I don't forget what her name is, Sarah the movie? Because it's really not about the bridesmaids at all. It's just about her and her own problems. And she just happens to be the maid of honor or whatever.
It's a really good movie that got caught up in the politics of the time because that is a thing. Like, there's kind of this thing in the comedy world where it's like women can't be funny. So it did really well financially. Critics really liked it. So if it was nominated for Best Picture, I think it was more of a political thing. Yeah. Like, you know, ooh, let's make them happy kind of thing. It was a really good movie. Don't get me wrong, but Best Picture, again, like this.
I kind of feel the same way about Black Panther. Black Panther was a very good movie too, but I kind of feel like it was nominated in response to the Oscars So White controversy.
It is exactly what that was. And that's the sad thing too, is like that is one of the best Marvel movies. Ironically, in my opinion, it's like the flip side where the action was kind of mediocre, but the writing was incredible. Mm-hmm. Like, it's one of the best villains they've ever had. It's just genuinely a really good story.
That was kind of like one of those movies where you can like, where the villain, you kind of just like, I can kind of see his point a little bit.
And then they kind of did that with Thanos. It's like, again, I'm happy it got the nomination, excuse me. And now that, like, ever since 2009, now they have 10 nominations for Best Picture. But I wish they jazzed it up a bit more. With 10 nominations, you can go all over the place, you know? And some years they really do. but yeah, like no. Now having seen this movie, agreeing pretty much with the critical praise it got, I am very surprised it got snubbed.
Like even if the Academy didn't want to give it, the Best Picture nomination, like not even adapted screenplay, like BAFTA gave it an adapted screenplay nomination, and I do think the script is very taut and very well written for this film.
It's one of those things too where I'd have to look at what else was nominated in 2018. Like, even if it didn't win, I just think it should have gotten a nomination. Because I think it was Best Picture of 2018? Probably not. If I refreshed my memory and saw what came out that year, I think my favorite film of 2018 was Annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
Very different movie.
Very different movie. I think at the BAFTAs at least the year that this was nominated for its awards, it said most of the winners went to Three Billboards.
It's funny. I haven't seen all of that director's films, but I've seen a few of them. And I don't even think I'm the odd one out saying this, but Three Billboards is the worst film of his that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
I'm not even trying to be contrarian. I'm just like In Bruges was really good. This Banshee movie thing that just came out looks really good. Three Billboards, I loved the premise, but when I was watching it, I don't know. I don't think it really did much with it.
It's been a while because that's one of the ones I made sure I went and saw in the theater, and I don't remember much about it. I know what the premise is. Couldn't really, but see, this is kind of also one of these things, and I talked about this before. This just goes back to the Academy's trying to pick the film they think will age the best, and
never works.
It never works, and then it's usually like I think because you know this because you're in LA. When you walk up and down the over at the Kodak Theater over there, where they have all the best pictures on the columns.
It's getting that time of year too. For your consideration,
yeah.
Not too long ago, it was all the Emmy billboards everywhere. Which I couldn't tell you what won this year.
But if you go up and down, the entryway to the Kodak Theater, and they have the like I said, the columns that have all the best pictures over at Hollywood and Highland. And I'm just like, especially the ones I'm alive, there will be some years I will remember that movie, but there's a whole bunch of years I'm like, I don't even remember this movie.
I know for a fact we've talked about this on the show, but yeah. It's another fun game to play with your friends. Go to a specific year and look at the nominations for the Oscars and the winners, and you will almost always be disappointed. Like the ones that stick out to me, I think it was 1967. And again, I think I brought this up in an older episode, but The Graduate was nominated for Best Picture, and it lost to In the Heat of the Night.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on your opinion, you might think that's... But I feel like that one had much more of a cultural impact. And same thing, 1996 is another popular one because Forrest Gump won, but also Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction were nominated, which...
I mean, I feel like those all...
they're all
had
good.
Equal cultural,
Exactly.
impacts.
That's one where it was just a really dang good year for movies. 2019 I'll always remember, and I don't think I'll think it aged poorly because Parasite winning just made a lot of weirdos on the internet mad.
Upset. Was
it my favorite film of that year? No. Did it deserve it? Sure. It was one of, I think it was in my top 3 for that year. That was another 2019. I feel like so far has been the best year for movies in a while. There's always been good movies coming out every year, but that one, there were so many good ones right before the pandemic, ironically.
Yeah.
It was
was that the year they brought Eminem out and he just did his random performance of his song from 8 Mile because he never did the performance back? Was that year? I think that was.
No, so what that was, I don't know if that was that year, but what that was it was celebrating all of the past winners. He was one of a bunch of people performing. It was something they were doing to spice it up to get people to watch or whatever.
Well, and also Eminem never performed the song.
Back to Paddington 2.
Back to Paddington 2. See, this is a great jumping off point for so many topics.
Right? It's just got its fingers in so many marmalades.
Exactly.
But,
ooh, I like that.
But was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we give our final rating?
Well, the only thing I was going to say, in addition to, I like to talk about your set design, and this is definitely a movie where color plays a big part in the mood of the film. And
Oh,
it's probably pretty obvious, but like usually the brightness doesn't change, the saturation of the color or color in general does change. Like for example, the big example I always think of is when we meet the circle for the first time. It's all bright and vibrant. All the houses are painted different colors, and they're all kind of bright and jewel tones. And then when he disappears and he's not there anymore, I can't even remember. I'm pretty sure they are, but like, what if they don't know if they repainted them or whatever? But everything is so washed out and desaturated. It's almost like the houses aren't even painted anymore. Like I don't even remember them being painted. And
well, the
this,
perfect example, I know what you're talking about. The example that comes to my mind is when Paddington serves all the prisoners a marmalade sandwich for the first time because it goes from gray to color.
yeah, it's a kind of like
Like
a
it's
warm
like the
color.
sun came out, it's like a cloud moved and suddenly there's like light inside the dining room.
That is like that is like some of the best performances ever, because they just told him, okay, just act like this is the greatest thing you've ever eaten in your life, and it's so funny to me just what every actor's different interpretation of the greatest meal ever is to you. I don't know if you watch that again, they've just some of their reactions are just odd, but I love that. Anyway, so that's kind of just what I want to say. But yeah, the color plays a big role in this movie. And like you said, the moment the marmalade enters their lives in the prison, it's not brighter or darker, but the color is now warm. It's warmer colors in there. And then of course they go and they add flower boxes and they kind of spice up the kitchen area a little bit. They add some tablecloths that's color, but the overall color tone goes from very cold to very warm. And
The set design to me kind of reminded me of a Wes Anderson movie,
thank
especially
you.
in the prison.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was actually going to say, and I'm going to say the thing, the whole thing when they show their escape. Does that not give you like what is that movie that Wes Anderson did? Moonrise Kingdom vibes with the
It gives me Wes Anderson's every movie he's ever directed vibes. I know, like I forgot if he, I, man, it's been a while since we talked about Moonrise Kingdom. It came up in our last episode,
it did.
but I don't remember how many movies of his you've seen. But like his visual style, like it's a Wes Anderson movie when you see it because he has like a very distinctive visual storytelling style and a lot of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
kind of making the prison like a dollhouse and stuff like that. Like it reminded me of that. And obviously Wes Anderson didn't direct this, but a lot of inspiration I feel came from his movies because I got big vibes, especially in the prison where everything is very symmetrical
Yeah.
and
I was once told when I first moved to LA and I had people over to my apartment the first time before it got overstuffed with stuff, they're like, "Oh, this kind of reminds me of a Wes Anderson film." So I took that as a compliment because to me he has very good style taste. But but yeah,
I guess your room was very symmetrical because that's
I
like his
guess
whole
it
thing
was
is
or
very.
something, or maybe it was very quirky or something. I don't know. But that escape sequence, that's always been kind of like one of my favorite sequences of the movie. First off, it's the reason why I brought up Moonrise Kingdom is because if I remember correctly, I thought they used like a miniature dollhouse sort of in that movie at one point to kind of lay out the house to everybody.
It's a whole thing with, again, Wes Anderson. All of his movies are very similar because in the Life Aquatic, when you're seeing what the ship that they sail on, how it operates, there's like a cross section of the ship and it looks like a dollhouse. It's literally like the escape sequence where they do a vivisection of the
Of the
building.
prison. And I love that. I love that, and I love the use of music there. And the inclusion of a ticking clock in the music also. That's actually like one of the songs I bought from the soundtrack on Amazon Music was that, because I have always loved that sequence, and I love the use. I love when music is used very well in movies, and to me that was like just beautifully used in that sequence.
The
It was
composer likes doing that because now that I know that it's the same composer as Atonement, he did the same thing with a typewriter in
ex-
that movie.
Yep, exactly. So I guess maybe he likes to use practical sounds from
Or
scenes.
like cool percussion from like everyday tools, I
Yeah,
guess.
something like that. But yeah, so now that we're getting down to this, I know we went on several tangents on here in this movie, but I feel like the fact that this movie is able to spur so much discussion, again, speaks to its kind of power as a film.
It's a good movie. As I said, like for the individual you brought up at the beginning of this episode, for people like that,
He
it's
was
not
like, it's
about,
just a slapstick comedy. I'm like, okay.
it's an ego thing. Like, for anyone who thinks that it's like bad just because it's like a kids movie, it's the same crap that like we talked about in Coraline. Like I said, it's stupid. It's reductive. And it also is like you can't come up with a good argument for it. So it's just, it's a kids movie. Like, if you want to get nitpicky about it, for sure, like all the stupid things I brought up about the criminal justice system in the Paddington universe. Like, if you want to have a funny argument about how Paddington should have never been arrested in the first place,
yeah,
fine. That's a valid criticism. Or like what I said about the plane crashing earlier. But yeah, like people who just think it's overrated, it's like, I don't think you're really judging it in good faith.
Yeah.
Like judge it based on how well it's made. Like, again, there's subjective and objective things you can judge a movie by. And objectively, this movie is really well made.
Yes, it is.
Might not appeal to you if you don't like cutesy kind of, happy movies. It's probably not going to be for you. But for the general population, it's a fine movie. And the popcorn score that you looked up even said so. It was, 88, 89? So most people liked this movon. You could do a lot worse.
I think it was 98 for this movie. Oh, wait, no, hang on. Of course, I lose what I am looking at. Paddington to Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, not Paddington 2, Rotten. Okay, there we go. It is... You're right, yeah, it's 88.
Okay, I just got a good memory.
You do have a good, better than mine.
But yeah, so my final rating out of 4 whiskeys is a solid 3. Bordering on 3.5, but I think I'm going to keep it at 3. Just for, like, maybe you don't like kind of happy movies or something. I don't know. It is solid.
If you don't like happy movies or something psychological.
You know what? What the hell? I'm at 3.5. It deserves
yes!
it.
Yes! I won one! No, I'm just kidding.
Like, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, why am I subtracting that half point? You know my philosophy about there not being any such thing as a perfect movie. I've broken that rule a few times. But nah, it's good. Like, frankly, it's a movie everyone in the family can enjoy. It's up there with other... Again, we went on a long rant about the Oscars, but I do think it's interesting that it could blow someone's mind that Mary Poppins was up for Best Picture the year it came out.
Right.
Because that's crazy nowadays. Kids' movies, like the last example of something like that I can think of happening was when Up was up for Best Picture.
Yeah, and I think that was just because they needed to fill they decided to expand the Best Picture category.
That actually irritated me because it was up for Best Animated Feature.
Yeah.
And Up is one of my favorite Pixar films, but I remember in 2009 when that happened, I was just like, can it just be one or the other? Like, does it need to be in both? But there you go. It's like it happened
for both foreign language and Best Picture.
Yeah, but they don't get as much. Again, it's Disney.
That's true. That is true. They didn't.
And that's the other
clout.
And that's the other reason I'm giving it 3.5 is Disney needs some more. Because this was Warner Brothers too. That was another thing. Like I thought this was like Sony or something when I went into it, but it's like no, this is Warner Brothers.
I believe it's the same producers as Harry Potter too.
So yeah, 3.5 for me. If you have HBO Max, be sure to watch Paddington 2 before they purge everything off of HBO Max because the CEO's a nut job.
Right? Oh my God, that guy is wild. Although if they're smart, they'll combine Discovery Plus and HBO Max into one platform.
That's what a smart person would do, and that would also, like, now it's kind of up in the air if HBO Max is even going to exist. And I love the quote from him about, like, unscripted content is for women. It's like, okay, buddy.
Oh my God, he said that?
Yeah, so he believes that, like, fiction is, like, for men and unscripted. And I know where he's getting that from. It's because, women just love the Kardashians. But it's like... Bro, my dad, like, watches documentaries more than anything, and that's technically unscripted content, so it's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Okay.
But yeah, if you got HBO Max, check out Paddington 2 before they pull it, because they're nuts.
And if you don't have a streaming service, this movie is popular enough that it does periodically run on, like, I think I've seen it on FX before. And I know I've seen it a few times on either ABC well, now it's Freeform, or
it's widely available.
It's widely available somewhere.
I watched it on Amazon. It's widely available everywhere, but
yeah. But if you want to watch, actually, I think for some reason it might be free with ads on one of these channels, like the Roku channel or something right now. But anyway, the point is he wants you to go see it. I agree. And so that's why my rating for this is, I'm actually
4 out of 4, right?
I'm giving it 4 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. Because, putting my own personal taste aside in this, it's very rare that I think a movie that is made to be enjoyed by all age groups receives the praise and can be, like as you said, technically perfect in this way. So that's why, again, I think everybody should go see this movie. It's great. It's heartwarming. There's still stakes in the movie, and I do think they're high stakes. So it's not like it's, like there's not really a conflict or anything. I think everybody should see this movie. It's a fun time.
With that being said, thanks for hanging out with us, guys. We're wrapping up the year. Our next episode is going to be the last one for the year, but the bright side, it's going to be especially long, and there's going to be a fun angle to it. Like I said, we're going to kind of make a drinking game out of it. So hopefully you tune in for that.
Yes.
If you're checking us out on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe and all that stuff. If you're just checking us out for the first time, we've got a whole backlog of episodes for you to listen to if you like hearing our voice. And yeah, hope to see you guys in the next episode. And feel free to hit us up on Twitter before Twitter burns to death with all that going on. What a crazy year it's been.
Well, on the bright side, in next month you'll get to hear the sounds of Whiskey's birth, because he's giving birth to this episode that we're going to do. This is his baby. He made me do he made me do actual work for it, so I'm kind of upset about that. No, I'm just kidding.
I think it's going to be good.
I think so too.
We'll see how it goes. As I said, sort of an experiment. I will say that it's sort of in reaction to the fact that we don't really talk about new movies too often. So we'll see how that goes. When we started this show years ago, we reviewed some movies that had just come out, and those did fairly well as far as listeners go. So I thought, hey, why don't we try to review some new movies? And you'll see, I'm being very cryptic. You'll see what I'm talking about if you tune into the next episode. So hope you tune in. Bring a drink, because like I said, you can play along with us if you want.
But do so responsibly.
Yes, please do. But until next time, I have been Whiskey.
And I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.